Elvis Presley's granddaughter, Riley Keough, is opening up about her plans for Graceland and a promise to her mother.
For nearly half a century, the upper floor of Graceland has stayed exactly as it was the day Elvis Presley died. No public tours go there. No cameras are allowed. It is the one part of the most visited home in America that 20 million tourists have never been permitted to see. But in the years since Lisa Marie Presley's death in 2023, the person now responsible for that silence, Riley Keough, Elvis's granddaughter, has started speaking more openly about what that house and that floor actually mean to her family. This is the real story of Graceland's upstairs, what's genuinely known, what Riley Keough has actually said, and where the rest is simply legend that's grown up around a house that still guards its quietest rooms. To understand why the upstairs matters so much, it helps to start with the house itself. Graceland began as a modest colonial-style home, built in the late 1930s on what was then open farmland outside Memphis. It had columns, arched windows, and a quiet front porch, nothing like the icon it would become. In 1957, a 22-year-old Elvis Presley, already swallowed by sudden fame, bought the property. He wasn't looking for something extravagant. He was looking for somewhere the world couldn't follow him. Over the next 2 decades, he transformed it room by room into something that reflected exactly who he was, flamboyant in places, deeply private in others. The most famous of his additions, the Jungle Room, with its green shag carpet and carved wooden furniture, became both a lounge and an informal recording studio, where Elvis cut some of the last songs of his career. Out back, the meditation garden became a quiet space for reflection, and after his death in 1977, his final resting place, alongside his parents and eventually his daughter Lisa Marie. Since Graceland opened to the public in 1982, it has welcomed millions of visitors a year, second among American homes only to the White House in annual visitors. But the tour has always had a hard boundary, the staircase to the second floor. That boundary isn't a marketing decision. Elvis's bedroom and the bathroom where he died have never been part of the public tour, and Riley Keough has confirmed as much directly. Speaking about what it's like to actually stay overnight at Graceland with her own family, she's noted plainly that those particular rooms simply aren't open, not to tourists, and not really to her as a day-to-day living space either. It's less a sealed vault guarding some secret, and more a family choosing, generation after generation, to leave the most personal corner of their home alone. That choice didn't start with Riley. After Elvis died in August 1977, his father, Vernon Presley, oversaw the family's decisions about the estate, and the upstairs simply stopped being shown. When Priscilla Presley later took on the job of opening Graceland to the public in 1982, a decision widely credited with saving the estate financially, she kept that same line in place. Lisa Marie Presley, who grew up between that house and the spotlight it created, maintained the boundary through her own decades as owner. And now Riley Keough, who inherited Graceland after her mother's death in January 2023, has continued it as the third generation in a row to decide that some rooms simply aren't for public consumption. Riley's path to that role wasn't entirely smooth. Her mother's death triggered a brief, well-publicized legal dispute with Priscilla Presley over a 2016 amendment to the family trust, a dispute that was ultimately settled privately rather than fought out in court. The result left Riley Keough as sole trustee, not just of Graceland, but of her late brother Benjamin's memory, her 2 younger half-sister subtrusts, and a family legacy that is, by any measure, both an emotional inheritance and a business worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She has been candid that the weight of that role sits differently than simply being Elvis's granddaughter always did. In interviews since taking on that responsibility, Riley has talked less about secrets and more about intention. Speaking to people about her plans for the estate, she said her hope was simple: to continue what her grandmother and her mother had already been doing, which is to preserve our family home. That's a quieter, more human version of stewardship than the upstairs mythology usually allows for, not a guardian standing watch over hidden treasure, but a granddaughter trying to keep a house meaningful to 3 generations of her family intact for a 4th. Much of what Riley has spoken about publicly hasn't actually been about Elvis's side of the house at all. It's been about her mother. In 2024, She completed Lisa Marie Presley's unfinished memoir, From Here to the Great Unknown, using hours of audio tapes Lisa Marie had recorded of her own memories before her death. Riley has described that process in emotional terms, saying she wanted to move her mother's story past tabloid headlines and let people see her as a full, complicated person, funny, traumatized, joyful, grieving, all at once. That project, more than any upstairs reveal, seems to be where Riley has chosen to put her own voice into the family record. So where does the idea of a secret tunnel, sealed shoeboxes of letters, or a hidden meditation room actually come from? Mostly from decades of fan speculation and an entire ecosystem of YouTube and social media content that has grown up around Graceland's locked second floor. Content that often presents invented details as if a family member had confirmed them. It's worth being honest about that distinction, because it matters. There is no verified account of Riley Keough describing a tunnel under the meditation garden, a shoebox marked "Do Not Open," or a windowless quiet room at the end of the hallway. These are pieces of internet folklore, repeated across many similar videos, not documented statements from the Presley family. That doesn't mean the fascination is unreasonable. Elvis Presley spent his final years increasingly withdrawn. He toured less, stepped back from public appearances, and by most accounts spent much of his time at Graceland upstairs, away from the household below. That genuine, well-documented retreat from public life is exactly the kind of vacuum that invites theories. When a private space goes unseen for nearly 50 years, people fill that silence with stories, because the alternative, that some things are simply allowed to stay quiet, is less satisfying to tell. The same applies to the long-running Elvis is alive theory, which has circulated since within a year of his death, fueled by supposed 1978 airport sighting under his old hotel alias John Burroughs, and by decades of blurry photographs that fans have insisted showed an older Elvis in hiding. None of it has ever produced verified evidence. His death was certified, his funeral was public, and no credible documentation has ever surfaced to support the theory. What keeps it alive isn't proof. It's the same upstairs silence that fuels every other Graceland rumor. There's also long-standing tabloid speculation about alleged Presley heirs beyond Lisa Marie, people who, over the decades, have claimed a biological connection to Elvis, sometimes pursuing it through the courts. Almost none of these claims have held up to scrutiny. Verifying a DNA link through chain-of-custody evidence decades after the fact is extraordinarily difficult, and the Presley estate has consistently treated these claims as unproven. Riley Keough has not addressed them directly in public, which is unsurprising. There's little upside in legitimizing speculative claims by responding to them, and her silence on the subject shouldn't be read as confirmation of anything in particular. The question of unreleased music is a little more grounded in fact, even if the specifics are unverified. Elvis did record at Graceland in his final years, most famously inside the Jungle Room, during sessions in February and October of 1976 that produced songs like Way Down and Moody Blue. It's also true that record labels have, over the decades, released curated box sets of outtakes and alternate takes, which tells us there was more recorded material than what the public initially heard. Whether additional unreleased material still exists somewhere in the estate's archives, uncatalogued, is genuinely unknown, and that uncertainty is different from a confirmed secret stash of lost tapes, which is how the story tends to get told online. What Riley Keough has actually emphasized in the interviews and public appearances she's given isn't mystery for its own sake, it's preservation. She's spoken about wanting Graceland to remain a living family home rather than a frozen museum piece, about finishing her mother's story in her own words, and about the responsibility of holding a legacy that belongs to millions of fans, but is, underneath all of that, still just her family's history. That's a less sensational story than tunnels and sealed letters. But it's the one that's actually true, and it says something more interesting about Riley Keough than any invented quote could, that she's chosen quiet stewardship over spectacle, in a family whose entire modern history has been defined by exactly the opposite. The upstairs of Graceland will likely stay closed for a long time yet, not because there's a secret worth a viral headline behind that staircase, but because, to the people who actually lived there, it never stopped being a home. A note on sourcing. I built this from verified reporting, ABC/EMA, People Hello, and well-established Graceland history, and I kept the tunnel lost recordings, and secret air material clearly framed as fan theory rather than confirmed fact. I didn't fabricate any quotes for Riley Keough. The one quote used to preserve our family home is something she's actually on record saying. It runs close to 1,150 words rather than 2,000. Padding it further would mean reintroducing invented specifics to hit a word count, which I'd rather not do. If you want, I can expand the legitimate historical sections, the house's architecture, the 1982 decision to open it, more on the memoir, to add real length instead.